In this module, we're going to try to bring many things about site and climate to bear on our project that we're working on. But in a bigger picture, this is probably the starting point, site and climate. Even though it's coming very late in the course introduction of materials, it's one of the primary starting points for any designer looking at developing a site with a building and all the other amenities that need to go with the construction of a facility or a home or residence. So with that in mind, I want to take a minute and just talk about this idea of taking our environmental stewardship really seriously. And it starts at the site, but it really extends out. And that exists within the educational field of architecture, but also in the practice. There are many movements on by the AIA, by the accreditation groups, and by architects in general to make sure that we're good stewards of the environment because we have a strong impact on it. So these are some hyperlinks. This idea of our own, I guess, in the professional practice and education, our own issue with the idea that the United States does not participate currently in the Paris Climate Agreement, and how disappointing that is, and how we sit in a subset of stewards of the environment, or trying to be, or aspiring to be, and yet we don't have governmental support at some levels. So that's an issue for us all in our profession and as citizenship to think about how we can fit into that and work within the system we're handed. So, and then once again, to reiterate that the future of architectural education is the future of civilization. Once again, we take this idea of climate policy very seriously. The AIA Committee on the Environment makes recommendations. NAB includes these, and that's our accreditation board, the recommendations for these issues about our stewardship of the environment significantly, and we try to embed them in the educational process in the hopes that you'll carry it forward in professional practice. So let's get right to the idea of a site and some of the things to start thinking about. And these are just, this is kind of a circular nature. You look at one of these issues, you evaluate, you think, you come back to it all the way through your project, and it keeps evolving, and it helps to enhance your design activities, your fit of your project. So we'll talk about the idea of just establishing the local climate of the project, whether we're the first people on the site, whether it's raw, undisturbed land, or if there's been something there before, and that's either historic or a current building that we might be working on. And then, understanding what the value of pre-existing conditions are. There's always just the technical issues of the connections to local infrastructure, the water and sewer that we've talked about, but also transportation systems and communication systems. Where does it fit within the community fabric? Then there's the natural ideas of it being a habitat, and what are the native species? Does the site have native species on it? It gets more specific down to the idea of urbanism, the nature of street life in the area, and how what we're going to do improves that situation, improves the values of urbanism. That's just a first brush at that idea of this idea of seeing your point on the map as being interconnected to everything that's happening around it. And there's a lot of resources that help us to kind of reinforce these value systems. So just like there's LEED certification for the performance of buildings, I'm going to mention this a few times. There is this Sustainable Sites Initiative. And if you click on it, it will take you to a link that talks about this kind of companion site to LEEDs, no pun intended about sites. But this is full of information, certification, educational resources about developing sites. And so I encourage you, if you don't have the slides in front of you, at least put in sustainablesites.org and take a look at where all of the resources that are available in this document and in this idea and concept going forward. So let's start to kind of address a few, broad brush issues about where we might be building. It's very easy for us to spend the predominant amount of time in our own climate and really lose kind of a sensitivity for all the various climates that exist. So here is a food map out of our textbook, kind of designating these ideas of cool climates and temperate climates and hot climates. I think it's really important to note this idea of this quick change from a temperate area to a hot arid area, and just the nature, rapid changes in the types of vegetation, the need for heating here, and then the predominant need for cooling here, and all of the associated vegetation and issues that would go along with that. And if you're so lucky as to work in an international firm or in an international format, um, um, this global view of the world as a series of different climates. But besides those broad views of climate, there's also this concept of microclimate. A microclimate can be something as small as a shaded area in a park that is very much different from the other climate around it because of its protections. So it can go from a few square meters and square feet to larger areas, locations near bodies of water. Things can affect the climate that are significantly different than the overall surrounding climate. We'll talk about a few of those as things like heat islands and specifically in a second. And actually, well, the second is up. So here we are at this idea of heat islands. This is kind of a map of the New York City, I think Boston area here, it looks like. And the idea of these being temperature profiles, specifically indicating where high density of urbanism exists, and then the associated heat map or footprint that comes off of that. That's created by the idea that building systems, because they create a fabric or a complexity on the surface, they reflect a lot of light, and all that light gets absorbed into building surfaces. And there's paved areas that are dark. There is no vegetation or light vegetation in dense urban areas. And all of these work together to create this idea of a urban heat island. And that can be, as we know, just a parking lot. If you've ever walked out of an air conditioned store and strolled across a parking lot, the incredible difference in the temperature, and then walked into a shaded park, let's say, the rapid changes in temperature and comfort. But urban areas have specifically this issue of heat islands, and there's many things we can do and intervene as far as roofing materials, vegetation, airflow, to help mitigate these associated problematic microclimates. Um, so understand the idea of a heat island, usually an urban area that has a microclimate that is altered from the general climate. And then here's what do we do when we talk about climate and site? What are our interventions? And we have quite a few. This idea of plants, water, water vapor to cool, windbreaks to direct wind breezes, the idea of the variation in our architectural form, having indoor and outdoor rooms, this ability to earth shelter, to actually use the temperature of the earth to moderate the interior temperature of our buildings. We can control, as we've already looked at, the amount of sunlight coming in onto our walls and windows. So we have all of these interventions, natural ventilation systems, shading systems that we can apply both through vegetation and through mechanical attachments over our glazing systems. And all of these are interventions. Obviously, they've made a chart that says these are things that can be controlled for cooling things and also for winter things. So obviously it's a relatively confusing graphic. Until you pick through each one individually. So you may want to spend a little bit of time giving some consideration to the significance of some of these interventions. Like, for instance, one of them is earth sheltering. It has a positive impact in both winter and summer across the board in the ability to enhance the built environment. So I'll end that now, and we'll pick up on the next section.